Good evening, friends. So, we are beginning our today's lecture. As you all are aware, and before I start, wish you all happy Maharashtra Day. And those of my friends who are married, wish you all a happy Labour's Day, World Labour's Day. So, we are coming back to the topic. Today's topic we have chosen is Understanding Evidence Act and Overview. As the topic suggests, we are not going into the details of each and every provision. We are not going into the nitty-gritties of specific sections. We are just trying to understand Evidence Act in a broader perspective. Now, why we chose this topic? The reason is some of our colleagues who have recently joined practice and some of our students, they had a strong feeling in their mind that yes, they are aware Evidence Act is really a very important piece of legislation, and they wish to read and understand Evidence Act, but in abstract it is very difficult. It is people are not able to connect to what they are reading. From where to begin? Where is the head? Where is the tail? It is indeed difficult if you just go on reading Evidence Act just for the sake of reading without having the reference or certain experience of trial. It becomes very difficult to grasp it in a proper sense. Evidence Act is very condensed. It covers within 167 sections all civil procedure, criminal procedure, administrative, quasi-judicial. Everywhere it can be used. It is so versatile, and yet it is so dense. It has a great density, and the knowledge is so deep which is incorporated in this act. And yet it is so versatile and it can be used at many places, and therefore the difficulty arises in reading the provisions, in understanding the provisions. And with this purpose, with this thing in mind, we have chosen this topic. Understanding it in a broader perspective, understanding it, why this act and what is the purpose of this act, why do we have it, what purpose it serves. Now, we all understand one thing, that in court of law you have to assert your right or seek imposition of certain liability on your opponent. These rights and liabilities and disabilities are provided under the substantive law. We are also aware that there are two categories, broader categories of laws. One is substantive law and the other is procedural law. The substantive law gives you right or imposes certain liability, whereas the procedural law, of which Evidence Act is also a part, including the Civil Procedure Code and the Criminal Procedure Code, provides for a mechanism how you can establish your right in the court of law during a trial or a proceeding. And Evidence Act serves the purpose. As we know what is the we commonly know that in order to prove your right, in order to establish your claim in the court of law, you have to prove facts. Without proof, nobody is going to entertain your claim, and therefore the claim will not be allowed. So what is that proof? What is evidence? And how that evidence is to be led? That here we come to the purpose of this Evidence Act. Why this Evidence Act is there? The Evidence Act, the broad purpose of Evidence Act is to provide for a framework and to lay down the procedure for proof of facts. One more purpose of the Evidence Act is to determine and to provide for the burden of proof, the quality of evidence which is to be led, the qualification and compellability of the witnesses, and most importantly, the purpose of Evidence Act is to minimize the number of facts to be proved to establish your claim. Now, how do we understand this? To minimize the number of facts to be proved. It is like this. In a case, say for example, some murder has taken place. What are the facts? Fact is that a male murdered a female by use of knife at night time at certain place, and while stabbing the lady he has uttered certain words. The lady was in love with him. These all are facts. Now, which facts are required to be proved to establish the guilt of this individual? Are all facts relevant? Are all facts which the witnesses are stating in the court are admissible? The Evidence Act comes to the rescue here, that it creates certain filters. The fact, in order to become evidence, has to go through certain procedure which is provided under the Evidence Act. Now what happens? A fact is defined under Evidence Act. Again, we must be very clear about one thing. Just like in general terms it is said, sab maya hai. In Evidence Act we call it sab facts hai. What do we give evidence of? We give evidence of fact. Now what is fact? The fact is defined under section 3 of Evidence Act. It says fact is anything or state of thing or relation of things which can be perceived by senses. The another category of fact is, it says that the fact is a mental condition of which a person is conscious. So Evidence Act defines fact in two categories. One is tangible category and other is intangible. The tangible category says it is anything relationship of things or state of thing which are perceived by senses. We have 5 senses, we all know. So what we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we smell and what we feel by touch, all these facts and the state of these facts and relation of these facts with other such facts are considered as fact. So if there is a glass of water on the table, the relationship between table and the glass of water is also a fact. And the state of fact is whether the water is in the ice form or it is in vapor form or it is in liquid form. The state of thing, anything, and the relation of thing with each other is fact. And the second category is intangible, as I said, is a mental condition of which a person is conscious of. So, whether certain act was done with certain intention, whether there was existence of some motive, or there was some fraudulently, whether an act was done dishonestly or fraudulently, these are all intangible facts, mental states, or whether a person is having certain reputation. These are also considered as fact for the purpose of Evidence Act. So we know there are two categories of facts. Facts which can be seen, perceived, and facts which cannot be perceived but of a mental condition which the person is conscious of. So for example, in a murder trial, again you have to prove not only stabbing by the accused but also what intention he had. Now if we go on leading evidence of each and every fact, the trial will go on forever. And therefore the Evidence Act comes to our rescue and it says that no, we will give you certain filtrations. The facts will have to go through certain filters. One such most important filter is the fact must be relevant. Relevant to the fact in issue, the fact which is subject matter of the trial or a civil proceeding. That is first filter. Now Evidence Act says that section 5 to 55, rather under section 5 Evidence Act provides that the evidence can be given of either fact in issue or of a relevant fact and of no other. So nothing else, no other fact can be proved before the court unless it is a fact in issue or it is related, relevant to the fact in issue. Now which fact is relevant and which fact is not relevant? Again section 3 says fact is relevant when it is provided under the chapter concerning the relevancy of facts. Section 5 to 55 deals with the relevancy of facts. So this is the first filter, that in order to prove a fact, the fact has to be first of all relevant as provided from 5 to 55. Then second filter is it should be admissible also. Just because the fact is relevant and it is found to be not admissible in law, then this fact also will not be allowed to be proved in the court of law. Now, one more filter is, or it's rather not a filter, it is like one more provision under Evidence Act which says that yes, certain fact need not be proved. Certain facts of which judicial note can be taken, or the facts which are admitted by the parties either in their pleadings or through interrogatories or in any other manner. If the facts are admitted, then those need not be proved. Again, the facts which are of which the court has to take judicial note of, or of the court which court may take judicial note of, these facts also need not be proved, and then court is saved of that burden of taking such facts in evidence. Similarly, there are provisions for presumptions. Certain facts court can presume. Again, section 4 defines may presume and shall presume. Certain facts court may presume. That means the court has choice whether to presume the fact, existence or non-existence of fact, or allow the party to lead the evidence. In case of shall presume, wherever it is provided that a court shall presume a certain fact, court has no choice but to presume it and then allow the other party to lead an evidence which is contrary to it to rebut the presumption. There is one more category which says conclusive proof. Now, conclusive proof is a case where if a certain fact is declared to be conclusive proof of another fact, the court has no choice. Court cannot allow even a contradictory evidence to be led when the court has already declared that this is the conclusive, when the law has already declared this is the conclusive proof of another fact. Example, under section 112 of Evidence Act, it is provided that if a child is born during the subsistence of a valid marriage, then this fact is conclusive proof of the paternity of the child. It is conclusively proved that that person is the father of the child, the one whose during the subsistence of whose marriage this child is born. Now here, if the person comes forward to the court and says, no, he is not my child, I can prove it otherwise, I can give DNA sample and this and that, court is precluded by Evidence Act to take such evidence. Court cannot take such evidence. Court will have to hold it that yes, once this child is born during the subsistence of this marriage, it has to be declared that this gentleman is father of this child. Of course, one exception is provided under section 112 only, but we are not discussing on that aspect. So what I want to say is that Evidence Act the purpose of Evidence Act is to minimize the number of facts to be brought before the court for the purpose of leading evidence, and it does so by providing for presumptions, by providing for the certain facts of which the court has to take judicial note, and providing for that admitted facts need not be proved, and it also provides that only relevant and admissible facts can be proved. Okay, now we will take a pause here. We have seen that only facts can be proved and only certain facts can be proved. Certain filters, admissibility, relevancy, etc. Now what happens? When does a fact become evidence? The definition of fact is different and definition of evidence is different. The evidence is defined under Evidence Act as oral evidence when the court permits the certain statements to be recorded before it, to be brought before it. Now you may read the exact words, but I am just generally discussing that there are two kinds of evidence as per Evidence Act. One is oral and the other is documentary. Oral is all those statements through witnesses which the court permits, and documentary is all those documents which the court permits. So again here court permits means what? As per Evidence Act. So which are admissible, which are primary and secondary evidence, such or court has to exclude hearsay evidence. So evidence is different than fact, and yet fact is evidence. Evidence is not different than, it's like a fact becomes evidence only after it goes through the process of procedure that established by law, the procedure which is provided under Evidence Act. So if fact passes the test of relevancy, if the fact passes the test of admissibility, and it passes the test of so many other tests, then and then only the fact can be considered as evidence. So fact has to qualify certain tests to become evidence. Now what happens? Fact has become evidence. Some procedure is followed. Hearsay is excluded, irrelevant is excluded, inadmissible are excluded. Now this fact becomes evidence. It is recorded in the record of the court. What is the importance of this evidence? What role this evidence plays? when the fact becomes evidence, it gets a persuasive value. Fact by itself has no persuasive value. When it becomes evidence, it gets a persuasive value. Now, what does this mean? It means that it has now a tendency to persuade a judge to come to certain conclusion about the existence or non-existence of a fact. It merely persuades a judge, and it has only a persuasive value. Now, I must also clarify that once the fact becomes evidence and it has certain persuasive value, whether the judge gets persuaded or not, it is not relevant. It still remains evidence. Once the fact has passed certain tests and become evidence, it gets a persuasive value anyway, and whether the judge gets persuaded by it or not, it is not relevant. So judge may get persuaded by the evidence, or he may not get persuaded by the evidence, or he may call for further evidence, or he may call for a contradictory evidence, but yet the fact remains to be an evidence once it has passed the tests, as we discussed. So this evidence gets the persuasive value. Now, to understand it in practical terms, what happens is, you bring certain facts before the court, go through the procedure, then these facts, some of the fact will be discarded, court may not accept it. Some of the facts or documents court will accept. It becomes evidence and it gets a persuasive value. Then on the basis of this, court has to give its finding. And this is where we come to this crux of this. The purpose of bringing evidence is to prove facts, so that your rights or somebody's liability is determined. Proof of fact is not evidence. Fact itself is not evidence. Proof is altogether different. So what happens when the evidence has certain persuasive value and the judge gets persuaded about the existence or non-existence of certain fact, then it is said that it is proved or it is disproved. So therefore, Evidence Act has three more definitions: proved, disproved, not proved. So on the basis of evidence and matter on record, when the judge gets persuaded to believe in existence of certain fact, then it is said that the fact is proved. When on the basis of evidence and matter on the record, judge comes to the conclusion about non-existence of certain fact, then it is said the fact is not disproved. Proved when existence is believed, disproved when non-existence is believed, and not proved means when the fact is neither proved nor disproved. So again, please understand the sequence. There is fact, it goes through the process, it becomes evidence. This evidence has persuasive value. The judge may get persuaded, may not get persuaded. If the judge gets persuaded about existence of a fact, then the fact gets proved. If the judge gets persuaded about non-existence of fact, then the fact gets disproved. And if there is confusion, neither it is proved nor it is disproved, then it will be declared as not proved. That particular fact will be declared as not proved. Hope you have understood till so far. Then what happens? We must have seen certain judgments. We have read some judgments. What does the judge do in his judgment? He discusses the facts which are pleaded by the parties. He frames issues in civil cases and points for determination in criminal cases. And on the in respect of the issues which are framed or the points which are to be determined, he gives his reasonings. In these reasonings, the judge discusses these facts, how those are sought to be proved, and then he gives his findings in the judgment. When the judge says, yes, it is proved, I believe in the existence of this fact, or I do not believe in, or I believe in non-existence of this fact, then he has to give his finding in the judgment on the basis of this evidence, whether he gets persuaded. So in a matrimonial case, he may say, yes, I am, or in a maintenance case. In a maintenance case, he may say, yes, based on the evidence, I believe that the husband has certain income. He believes in existence of certain fact. Or he may observe that on the basis of the evidence on record, I believe that wife's income is not as much as giving a finding about non-existence of a fact. So here, when we say proved or disproved, it forms the part of the finding of the judge. So after evidence, the judge gives his, discussing the evidence, he gives his findings. There he declares that this fact is proved and this fact is not disproved or not proved. And on the basis of these findings, then he concludes. Then he gives his conclusions, his verdict, and after that certain operative order. So to understand in general, again I am repeating, it may be a little bit boring, but to relate things, Evidence Act tries to minimize the number of facts to be proved. Facts, when processed through these filtrations and led before the court through a procedure which is established in Evidence Act, becomes evidence, and this evidence has a persuasive value to persuade the judge in believing the existence or non-existence, and on the basis of that the judge gives his findings, and on the basis of findings he gives his verdict. So this is the purpose of why we bring these facts, why we lead evidence. Now, one more definition we should understand, the definition of fact in issue. Why? Because Section 5 of Evidence Act makes it very clear that evidence can be given of fact in issue or of facts which are relevant to the issue. Now, what is fact in issue? Fact in issue is defined as something from which your right, liability or disability arise. You can see the definition. Right, liability or disability. That means fact in issue is connected to substantive law. Substantive law will provide for the right and liability, disability, etc. In other words, fact in issue is something which a plaintiff must prove to establish his claim, or a defendant must prove to establish his claim if there is a counterclaim, or to establish what he wants to assert before the court. Fact in issues are basically the disputed facts, but from which the right or liability arises. So a plaintiff must prove this fact to establish his claim. Then only it becomes the fact in issue. From other angle, to understand this, we have often heard two terms: direct evidence and circumstantial evidence. Now let us understand. Whatever evidence that is given in respect of fact in issue is direct evidence, and whatever evidence that is given in respect of relevant facts is circumstantial. I am repeating this: direct evidence and circumstantial evidence. Direct evidence is the evidence given in respect of fact in issue. Circumstantial evidence is the evidence given in respect of relevant facts. And we have already discussed only two kind of facts can be evidence can be given of only two kind of facts. One is fact in issue and the relevant facts. Now here, as a matter of caution, please understand, direct evidence is not direct witness. Sometimes we get confused. The Evidence Act is based on the principle of best evidence rule. So it discards hearsay evidence. It wants best evidence for everything. And it is provided under section 60 as per when it is oral evidence, and under section 64 when it is documentary evidence. Again, we know that there are only two kind of evidence. One is oral and documentary. So in respect of oral evidence, Evidence Act provides that oral evidence should be given by a witness who himself has perceived the fact, who has seen it, who has heard it. That means what? Evidence Act does not want to rely on hearsay. It wants a direct witness. Now, direct witness means an eyewitness, generally we call it, when it is oral disposition. When it comes to documentary evidence, again, the Evidence Act provides that the evidence should be given with a primary document, primary evidence. Primary evidence means the document itself. Of course, there are exceptions to the rules. In case of oral evidence, somewhere at some in very exceptional cases like dying declaration, hearsay evidence is permissible with certain conditions. Similarly, in case of documentary evidence, a secondary evidence is also permissible subject to certain conditions which are incorporated. But the main rule is best evidence rule. Whenever it is available, you have to lead evidence through the witness who saw it or through the very document which is the subject matter. Now, coming back to this aspect of direct evidence and circumstantial evidence. The witness will be direct in any case. The witness will be who saw it or who heard it. So for circumstantial evidence also, you need a direct witness, an eyewitness. And for a direct evidence, also you need a direct witness, an eyewitness. I will give you an example. A stabs B. Now, the fact in issue is whether A stabbed B with certain intention. When witness says that he saw A stabbing B, he is a direct witness because he saw it, and he is giving a direct evidence because he is giving evidence of a fact in issue, whether A stabbed B. But when another witness comes and says that he saw A coming out of B's house with the blood-stained weapon, again the second witness is also a direct witness of what he saw. But here he is not giving the direct evidence. He is giving the circumstantial evidence, a relevant fact. Hope I am clear, because this is not an interactive session. One way I have to say it. So I believe that you have understood it. Evidence, whether it is direct or circumstantial, has to be given by a eyewitness. Direct evidence is in respect of the fact in issue, and circumstantial evidence is in respect of relevant facts. Okay, now we move on. These are the two kinds of evidences. One more classification of evidence. So we discussed it. Now coming to another aspect. We have understood what happens to facts, how fact becomes evidence, what is the value of evidence, how this evidence is to be laid. Now coming back to the purpose of Evidence Act again. Evidence Act will answer certain questions. What are those questions? The question number 1 is, we have already discussed, which facts are provable? What facts can be proved? We have discussed it, the relevant facts and the facts which are in issue, which should be admissible. The second question which the Evidence Act will deal with is, which facts need not be proved? The facts which need not be proved are discussed under section 56 to 58 of Evidence Act. Which fact need not be proved? Such as the facts which are admitted by the parties, or the facts of which the court can take judicial note of. These facts need not be proved. The third question which the Evidence Act deals with is, by which means the facts are to be proved. By which means, what is the method, what is the mean to prove the fact? And those are discussed under chapter 4, 5 and 6 of Evidence Act. Means, oral or documentary, witnesses. These are discussed under chapter 4, 5 and 6 of Evidence Act. The fourth question which the Evidence Act deals with is, which party is required to prove? Again, this is very important aspect. Burden of proof. Okay, proof is required. Who will prove? On whom the burden is to prove certain fact? That is also the subject of evidence, and Evidence Act will answer this question, and that it has answered under chapter 7, section 101 to 114A deals with this, the burden of proof. The fifth question which the Evidence Act deals with is about the competence and compellability of witnesses. Who is the competent witness? Which of the witness can be compelled to give evidence? For example, you have seen in criminal cases, the accused cannot be compelled to give evidence if he chooses not to. So, compellability and competence of the witnesses is dealt under chapter 9, that is section 118 to 134. Next question, that is sixth question, which the Evidence Act will answer, is about the order and manner of examination of witnesses. How the witnesses should be examined, in which order, who will come first, who will come last. This order and the manner of examination, whether chief will be taken first or cross, and what kind of question can be asked in chief, what kind of question can be asked in cross examination, when re-examination, to what this re-examination should be confined to. These aspects are dealt with under chapter 10, section 135 to 166. And the last and most important aspect which Evidence Act will deal with is to what standard the facts need to be proved. That is the standard of proof. What should be the standard of proof? We all know in civil cases the standard of proof is different than in criminal cases. In criminal cases the standard of proof is beyond reasonable doubt. The facts must be proved beyond reasonable doubt. In civil cases we relax this condition a little bit and we say, okay, we will test it. The burden of proof, the standard of proof will be only of the preponderance of probability. Well, we will, if we want to, we are short of time now, we will conclude very fast. We will not go into the details of what is preponderance of probability and what is beyond reasonable doubt. But these are the standards of proof which are required, and that is also dealt with under the Evidence Act. Now, to conclude today's lecture, the topic was a broad overview. Now we have seen that Evidence Act deals with facts that are required to be proved, and it creates certain filters as to which facts are required to be proved and which facts should be discarded. It provides for a scheme of how evidence should be led, which party has burden to prove a certain fact, what should be the standard of proof, which facts are required to be taken judicial note of, which facts need not be proved, and so on. So this is the broad discussion about the purpose of Evidence Act. The purpose was to understand that in this background, when we understand that how this fact becomes evidence and how evidence, what is the value of evidence in the court of law and what is the manner of producing it and who is burdened with certain responsibility, what is fact in issue and what are the relevant facts. Now with this in mind, if we go and read the Evidence Act, we will have a better clarity and we will have a better understanding of what we are reading in the Evidence Act. Of course, this is just an introduction. The devil lies in details. So when you read the provisions in detail, you will have more and more queries. Of course, here you will have some clarity about why you are reading it and what is the purpose of that particular chapter which you have taken for the purpose of reading, or that particular section. So hope this discussion was useful.
Mr. Naldi's query is there.
And I would like to now address certain queries which are there. I will just check it, and if there are more queries, you may please go on posting it on this particular group. Now one query is, what is the query?
Please explain illustration.
By Advocate Mr. Raj Nalge. He explains, please, he has asked, please explain illustration and illustration D and H of section 114 and section 54. Now D and H are there in 114 and 54, I will just check. Illustration, well, section 114 relates to court may presume existence of certain facts, and the illustration D says that a thing or state of thing which has been shown to be in existence within a period shorter than within which such thing or state of thing usually cease to exist is still in existence. Well, it says that thing or state of thing which has been shown to be in existence within a period shorter than. For example, by example, I will try to explain it what has come to my mind. Certain things exist for certain time, certain duration, and then it ceases to exist. Let me give you an example of a ice cube. A ice cube, when it is kept at a room temperature, it will cease to exist in that particular form, that state, after certain time. But the law permits, or for example, a vegetable, a perishable commodity, it ceases to exist in that particular form. Or for example, a dead body, when the rigor mortis develops, after certain time the body ceases to exist in that particular form. So here 114 says the court may presume existence of certain fact. Court may presume the existence of any fact which it thinks likely to have happened, regard being had to the common course of natural events, human conduct, public and private business, in their relation to the fact of a particular case. So here the court is given discretion that alright, even if it is shown that it did not exist, or the court can take a judicial note of it. Says that the thing, D says that the thing or a state of thing which has been shown to be in existence within a period shorter than within which such thing or state of thing usually ceases to exist is still in existence. Court can say that yes, that is there. It had existed anyway for a shorter or longer duration. But at that moment, court can presume a fact that yes, this particular fact exists. And when court presumes, it means court may presume. It says that court may presume. So the court is having a choice of presuming it based on the common course of conduct, depending on the facts of each case. And may presume means what? Section 4 says, when it is may presume, court will allow the other party to bring a contradictory evidence or contrary evidence, or it may make an inquiry itself or further evidence may be called for to establish the fact which the court has chosen to presume. Now section 54, Mr. Nalke has also asked about section 54. Now what is section 54? I will just go to it. And section 54 says previous bad character. Yes. Now here we have to understand the character is not a relevant fact, but we have to distinguish between civil and criminal. In criminal cases, character is not a relevant fact at all. Previous character. Here it defines like this. In criminal proceedings, the fact that accused person had a bad character is irrelevant. Somebody is bad, that doesn't mean he is bad for every case. And unless the evidence has been given that he has a good character, in which it becomes relevant. So good character is relevant, but not the bad character. Now explanation to this is with respect of which is this question raised. This section does not apply to the cases in which the bad character of a person itself is a fact in issue. If the fact in issue is, for example, murder, killing, then in that case bad character is not relevant. But where the fact in issue is about the character of individual itself, for example a case of prostitution, then here the character is the central point, it is the fact in issue, and in respect of this the previous character will become relevant when it is fact in issue. When fact in issue is different, then in that case a bad character, previous bad character is not relevant. That is my understanding. Now, it also, second explanation says a previous conviction is relevant as evidence of bad character. That only says that if at all bad character is relevant for a certain purpose, then in that case a previous conviction will be a relevant fact. It is about relevancy. Now, I will conclude this. I cannot answer each and every question. We have actually exceeded our time limit. Yes.
Few queries.
There are some queries about secondary evidence and about electronic evidence, and Rita Gandhi has also about chapter wise explanation. Now, yes, we would like to do it, but again there are time constraints. So today I have just given a broad explanation of what idea of what Evidence Act is about, and in some other lecture we will certainly deal with this chapter wise and all. Well, so today we will conclude. Now I must thank Vidhi Foundation for taking this initiative, and I will also remind you about the lecture which my learned friend Mr. Sandesh Patil will be taking on 4th of May, and it is going to be a very good lecture. It is about hostile witnesses. So he will be going into details. The broader aspect we will be discussing. Some we have discussed, some we will be discussing in some other lecture. And he will be going into very specific into about he will be discussing on the subject of hostile witnesses. Please do attend this lecture. I will also be attending. Mr. Sandesh Patil is a very learned advocate and is very studious. He is thorough. He is a gold medalist in his times, and his lecture will be really very great. I am looking forward to it, and I will recommend that all of you also join on 4th in this very group for attending the lecture of Mr. Sandesh Patil. Thank you very much. Hope I was able to explain a little bit about what Evidence Act is all about. Thank you once again.